Very few men in history have commanded fear in others like Reggie Cole. His story begins in the tumultuous backdrop of 1985 Los Angeles, a city rife with crime, violence, and gang activity. As a young boy of just 10 years old, Reggie found himself thrust into a perilous environment where the allure of gang life beckoned to those around him. His older brother Kenny, seeking belonging and purpose, succumbed to the temptation and joined one of the violent gangs that plagued their neighborhood. As Kenny became increasingly embroiled in the gang's activities, Reggie watched with a mixture of concern and fascination. He witnessed firsthand the consequences of his brother's choices as the gang engaged in skirmishes and violent armed conflicts with rival factions. The streets of Los Angeles became a battleground, and Reggie found himself navigating a dangerous and unforgiving landscape. Despite the chaos and danger that surrounded him, Reggie remained determined to carve out a different path for himself. He resisted the charm of gang life, choosing instead to focus on his education and pursue his dreams. However, fate had other plans in store for him. At just 19 years old, Reggie found himself incarcerated in one of America's most formidable prisons, where he came face to face with the notorious kingpin known as El Diablo. The confrontation between Reggie and El Diablo was fraught with violence and danger, yet it ultimately led to unexpected consequences that would change Reggie's life forever. As the story unfolds, we delve into the gripping events that unfold within the walls of the prison, witnessing Reggie's journey of resilience, courage, and redemption. The tragic loss of Reggie's older brother Kenny to a senseless act of gang violence cast a long shadow over his life, leaving him grappling with grief and struggling to find his footing in a world overshadowed by violence and crime. Despite his best efforts to focus on his studies and move forward, the trauma of his brother's death loomed large, threatening to consume him. Reggie's family rallied around him, offering support and comfort in the wake of their devastating loss. They sought to shield him from the harsh realities of their neighborhood, hoping to spare him from the same fate that befell Kenny. However, the allure of the streets proved too strong to resist. As Reggie immersed himself in his studies, attempting to forge a path away from the violence and turmoil that surrounded him, the pull of his brother's world grew ever stronger. Inheriting Kenny's friends and acquaintances, Reggie found himself drawn deeper into the dark underbelly of the crime-ridden streets. Despite his initial resistance, Reggie's gradual descent into the criminal underworld seemed inevitable. With each passing year, he found himself drifting further from his studies and closer to the dangerous allure of gang life. Eventually, the weight of his grief and the lure of revenge proved too potent to resist, leading him to abandon his education and embrace the world of crime that had claimed his brother's life. The disintegration of Reggie Cole's family following the tragic loss of his brother Kenny marked a turning point in his life, pushing him further into the perilous world of crime and violence. With his family torn apart by grief and separation, Reggie found himself adrift in a sea of turmoil, desperately seeking solace and belonging in all the wrong places. As his siblings scattered to pursue their own paths, Reggie's support system crumbled around him. His older brother, the sole breadwinner of the family, departed for a job in another city, leaving Reggie and his mother to fend for themselves in their fractured home. Meanwhile, his sisters embarked on new lives with their husbands, further diminishing the sense of unity and stability within the family. The absence of a strong male role model and the breakdown of familial bonds left Reggie vulnerable to the influences of his surroundings. His mother, overwhelmed by grief and despair, struggled to rein in his wayward behavior, watching helplessly as he drifted further and further from her grasp. Despite offers of employment from his brother-in-law, Reggie remained stubbornly entrenched in his own world, rejecting the opportunity for legitimate work in favor of the illicit activities that held sway over his life. In a desperate bid to find his place in the world, he turned to the dangerous trade of drug trafficking, seeking validation and purpose in the shadows of society. Reggie Cole's descent into the criminal underworld reached a devastating climax when he was arrested for murder at the tender age of 19. Despite his initial brushes with the law for minor offenses like drug possession and resisting arrest, Reggie had managed to avoid the more violent aspects of gang life. However, fate dealt him a cruel hand when he found himself embroiled in a fatal altercation outside a notorious brothel in his neighborhood. The events of that fateful night marked a turning point in Reggie's life, sealing his fate and condemning him to a lifetime behind bars. Convicted of murder, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his days in Calipatria prison, a notorious institution known for its harsh conditions and rampant violence. As Reggie donned the unmistakable orange jumpsuit of a new inmate, he prepared to embark on a harrowing journey into the depths of the prison system. Boarding a bus with other prisoners bound for Calipatria, he braced himself for the unknown horrors that awaited him within its walls. The desolate landscape outside the city served as a stark reminder of the isolation and despair that awaited Reggie and his fellow inmates. With each passing mile, the reality of his situation began to sink in, overshadowing any lingering hopes of redemption or escape. As the bus trundled closer to Calipatria prison, Reggie's nerves were palpable. The sprawling complex emerged from the desolate desert landscape, its imposing structures casting a shadow over the barren surroundings. Reggie couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over him like a suffocating shroud. The sight of Calipatria prison, with its labyrinthine layout and remote location, only served to reinforce the sense of isolation and hopelessness that permeated the air. It seemed like a place forgotten by time, a desolate wasteland where society's rejects were condemned to spend their days in eternal solitude. As the bus passed through the prison gates, Reggie was assailed by the overpowering stench of decay and filth. The odor emanating from the nearby animal pens assaulted his senses and filled him with a profound sense of despair. He could feel the weight of his impending incarceration bearing down on him with crushing force. Despite his best efforts to block out the noxious smell, Reggie found himself unable to escape its suffocating grip. With his hands bound to the chair and his fate sealed, he could do nothing but resign himself to the grim reality of life behind bars. The imposing presence of the electrified fences served as a constant reminder to the inmates of the formidable barriers that encased them within the confines of Calipatria prison. These barriers, both internal and external, were designed to deter any attempts at escape and to maintain strict control over the prison population. The electrified fences, with their menacing aura of danger, acted as a physical manifestation of the prison's authority, warning inmates of the dire consequences of defiance. Crossing these fences meant confronting almost certain death, a stark deterrent in itself. Inside the prison, the scarcity of guards relative to the vast number of inmates created a volatile environment where tension simmered just beneath the surface. The ratio of 1 guard to every 50 prisoners meant that maintaining order within the prison walls was a constant struggle, with the guards perpetually outnumbered and overmatched. The recent incident involving the stabbing of 8 guards by 5 prisoners highlighted the inherent dangers lurking within Calipatria prison. The fact that the prisoners were able to fashion makeshift knives and carry out such a brazen attack underscored the pervasive atmosphere of violence and lawlessness that pervaded the facility. As Reggie stepped into his cell, the stark reality of his new living quarters hit him like a ton of bricks. The cell, with its barren walls and lack of natural light, resembled a tomb more than a place of habitation. The absence of windows only added to the sense of confinement and isolation that permeated the space. His cellmate, a sleeping figure on the lower bunk, represented an unknown variable in Reggie's already uncertain existence. Despite the proximity that would inevitably characterize their shared living space, Reggie chose to maintain a cautious distance, avoiding any unnecessary interactions that could potentially lead to conflict. The prison uniform, with its drab colors and institutional design, served as a constant reminder of Reggie's status as an inmate, stripped of his freedom and individuality. The thorough strip search upon arrival further emphasized the loss of privacy and dignity that accompanied life behind bars. As Reggie settled into his new surroundings, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding about the days and years that lay ahead. The routine of prison life, with its strict schedules and regimented activities, offered little in the way of solace or comfort. Reggie's strategy of avoiding interaction with other prisoners was born out of a keen awareness of the dangers lurking within the walls of Calipatria prison. His decision to distance himself from his cellmate, even in their shared confinement, was a calculated move to minimize his vulnerability in a hostile environment. The brutal assault suffered by his cellmate served as a stark reminder of the harsh realities of prison life and the constant threat of violence that loomed over its inhabitants. Despite his instincts to intervene or seek help, Reggie chose instead to feign sleep, a desperate attempt to protect himself from a similar fate. The repeated attacks on his cellmate underscored the merciless nature of the prison hierarchy, where power and dominance were ruthlessly asserted through acts of brutality and intimidation. Reggie's passive response, while driven by self-preservation, also highlighted the moral compromises inherent in survival within such a dehumanizing system. As Reggie lay awake on his bunk, listening to the sounds of his cellmate's suffering, he grappled with conflicting emotions of guilt, fear, and helplessness. Each assault reinforced the precariousness of his own safety and the ever-present threat of becoming the next target of violence. Reggie's realization that he needed to arm himself for protection in prison reflects the harsh reality of life behind bars, where survival often depends on one's ability to defend oneself. The sight of makeshift weapons wielded by other inmates served as a sobering reminder of the constant threat of violence lurking within the confines of Calipatria prison. Resourceful and determined, Reggie improvised a weapon using the only tool at his disposal, his toothbrush. Through painstaking effort, he transformed the innocuous grooming implement into a deadly instrument, sharpening its tip to a point capable of inflicting harm. In this unforgiving environment, even the most mundane objects could become tools of survival. As Reggie navigated the complex social dynamics of the prison yard, he recognized the importance of aligning himself with a protective group. Aware that joining a gang offered a measure of security in an otherwise perilous environment, he set out to find an affiliation that aligned with his pre-incarceration allegiances. However, gaining acceptance into a gang was no easy feat for a newcomer like Reggie. He understood that he needed to earn their trust and demonstrate his loyalty through actions rather than words. Despite the inherent risks involved, Reggie was willing to do whatever it took to secure his safety and establish a sense of belonging in the brutal world of prison life. Caught off guard and isolated by a group of menacing inmates, Reggie found himself in a precarious situation that demanded quick thinking and decisive action. Aware of the potential consequences of drawing attention to himself, he had tried to maintain a low profile, hoping to avoid becoming entangled in the violent power struggles that permeated the prison yard. However, his efforts to remain inconspicuous proved futile when he was ambushed by the gang of prisoners, who wasted no time in asserting their dominance over him. The leader of the group, a formidable figure whose imposing presence commanded attention, seized Reggie by the neck and pinned him against the prison fence, effectively trapping him and subjecting him to the scrutiny of his fellow inmates. Feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him, Reggie realized the gravity of his predicament. He understood that his response in that moment would shape his fate within the prison walls. Memories of his cellmate's suffering served as a grim reminder of the consequences of inaction, compelling Reggie to summon the courage to defend himself against his aggressors. In a split-second decision fueled by instinct and desperation, Reggie seized the opportunity to defend himself against his aggressors. Drawing upon his makeshift weapon, a sharpened toothbrush, he swiftly retaliated, delivering a calculated but non-lethal stab to his assailant's waist. It was a strategic maneuver intended to assert his strength and deter further attacks without escalating the conflict to fatal proportions. Reggie's calculated response sent shockwaves through the group of prisoners, shattering their illusion of dominance and forcing them to reassess their perception of him. The sudden display of resistance transformed Reggie from a perceived target into a formidable adversary, earning him a newfound reputation as a force to be reckoned with within the confines of the prison. As the gang dispersed and the immediate threat subsided, Reggie's act of defiance reverberated throughout the prison yard, leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of his fellow inmates. His resilience in the face of adversity garnered respect and admiration from some, while instilling fear and apprehension in others. In the wake of this pivotal moment, Reggie's actions caught the attention of a prominent gang known as 49, who recognized his potential and extended an invitation for him to join their ranks. Within the chaotic confines of Calipatria prison, Reggie's ascent to prominence was marked by his ability to carve out a niche for himself amid the pervasive atmosphere of violence and lawlessness. Yet, amidst the labyrinthine network of gangs vying for power and influence, one figure loomed large over them all: Eddie Clark, known to the inmates as El Diablo, the devil incarnate. El Diablo's formidable presence cast a shadow over the entire prison, wielding power and authority with an iron fist. He commanded respect through fear, establishing himself not only as a dominant force within the prison hierarchy, but also as the undisputed kingpin of a thriving criminal empire. Behind the prison walls, El Diablo presided over a clandestine operation that facilitated the smuggling of drugs and contraband, orchestrating illicit transactions with ruthless efficiency. His control extended beyond mere territorial dominance, encompassing a complex network of illicit activities that spanned the entire prison population. In the eyes of both inmates and guards alike, El Diablo held sway as an untouchable figure, his influence permeating every facet of prison life. Even the authorities, begrudgingly acknowledging his status, opted to appease rather than confront him, granting him special privileges in exchange for maintaining a tenuous semblance of order within the volatile confines of the prison. Despite the inherent volatility of Calipatria prison, there existed a delicate equilibrium that teetered on the brink of chaos. While the specter of violence loomed large within its walls, the semblance of peace that prevailed was a fragile veneer, maintained through a delicate balance of power and concessions. The presence of El Diablo, with his iron grip over the prison's illicit operations, served as both a stabilizing force and a constant reminder of the potential for upheaval. His tacit agreement with the guards, who afforded him special privileges in exchange for relative calm, underscored the precarious nature of the prison's internal dynamics. For inmates like Reggie, finding solace within the confines of a gang offered a semblance of security amidst the chaos. The camaraderie and mutual trust fostered within these tight-knit groups provided a lifeline in an otherwise hostile environment, allowing them to navigate the treacherous waters of prison life with a modicum of safety. Yet even amidst this relative tranquility, the specter of El Diablo loomed large, casting a shadow over the everyday lives of the inmates. Reggie, like his fellow prisoners, understood the importance of avoiding confrontation with this formidable figure, recognizing that attracting his attention could spell disaster. In this tenuous balance of power, where violence lurked just beneath the surface, the quest for survival meant navigating a labyrinth of alliances and allegiances while treading carefully to avoid the ire of those who held sway over the prison's fate. Everyone was familiar with the tale of El Diablo, who, despite being just 34 years old, had spent 2 decades behind bars. His violent tendencies surfaced early in life. At the tender age of 13, he found himself incarcerated in a juvenile detention center after fatally assaulting another teenager. Upon reaching adulthood, El Diablo swiftly returned to a life of crime, culminating in a heinous act where he broke into the home of an elderly woman, assaulting her and tragically killing her son, who attempted to intervene. Subsequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, earning his moniker as the savage he was. However, El Diablo's volatile temperament meant that even his closest associates were not immune to his sudden outbursts of rage. As the de facto ruler of the prison, he wielded unchecked power and always got his way, regardless of the circumstances. For the next 2 years, Reggie managed to lead a relatively peaceful existence within the prison walls, steering clear of El Diablo and avoiding entanglements that could lead to trouble. Over the ensuing 4 years, he dedicated himself to physical fitness, diligently homing his strength and muscularity. The scrawny teenager who first entered the prison at 19 had transformed into a robust 24-year-old, thanks to his focused efforts on building his physique. Little did he know, this newfound strength would prove invaluable in the challenges that lay ahead. Over time, El Diablo's condition deteriorated significantly. He descended into alcoholism, constantly inebriated. The volatile mix of violence and drunkenness resulted in outcomes more dire than imaginable. Even those closest to him grew fearful. A single misstep could provoke him into physical assault, stabbing, or even sexual violence. The situation surrounding this savage tyrant grew increasingly chaotic by the day. Despite managing to avoid him for the past 4 years, Reggie would soon find himself thrust into a direct confrontation. In October of 2000, tensions escalated in the prison yard when a pebble was hurled at a guard. Prompted by the incident, guards ordered all prisoners to lie down for a thorough search. During the search, a handmade knife was discovered, presumably discarded by a prisoner to evade detection. Unbeknownst to the guards, the knife belonged to El Diablo's closest confidant and trusted ally, his cellmate. Despite the silent acknowledgement among the prisoners regarding the knife's ownership, no one dared to speak up, aware of the consequences. In that critical moment, El Diablo himself lay among the prisoners, scanning the crowd for a scapegoat. His gaze landed on Reggie, who happened to be engaged in painting a wall as part of the prison's maintenance tasks. Reggie lay on the ground alongside the other prisoners, paintbrush in hand. He sensed the weight of El Diablo's gaze upon him, understanding the malicious intent behind it. Suddenly, El Diablo singled him out, pointing directly at Reggie, falsely accusing him as the owner of the knife. In those fleeting moments, Reggie's mind raced, contemplating the potential ramifications. While an additional weapon possession charge wouldn't alter his already lifelong sentence, it would tarnish his reputation among the inmates. Submitting to El Diablo's false accusation would mark him as weak, vulnerable, and a prime target for exploitation. In that crucial moment, Reggie resolved to confront the prison's devil just as he had stood up to other threats before. When the guards inquired about the knife, Reggie firmly denied ownership, a simple yet pivotal declaration that would shape his fate. By rejecting El Diablo's accusation, Reggie unwittingly positioned himself as the declared enemy, drawing shock from both inmates and guards alike. Reggie lived in constant fear, anticipating an attack from El Diablo or one of his cohorts at any moment. Even in the supposed safety of his bed at night, sleep eluded him, and during breaks in the outdoor yard, he maintained a vigilant watch over El Diablo and his inner circle, strategically positioning himself near guards or in places where he would be under their watchful gaze, hoping to avoid falling prey to El Diablo's schemes. However, his precautions proved futile a month later, in November 2000, when El Diablo approached him openly in the outdoor yard. Reggie found himself paralyzed with indecision as El Diablo advanced, eventually standing directly in front of him. With a swift motion, El Diablo grasped Reggie's shoulder with his left hand and delivered a painful stab to his side with his right. Though the wound was not life-threatening, it served as a chilling message, a stark reminder of Reggie's precarious position within the prison hierarchy. As El Diablo withdrew the knife and discarded it in the grass, Reggie instinctively pressed his hand against the wound to stem the bleeding, receiving no assistance from the indifferent onlookers, including the guards. He had also concealed a knife that he had obtained from the outdoor yard, carefully burying it in a hole for future use. Just moments before leaving the yard, he retrieved the knife and joined the line for the post-break search, keeping the weapon concealed in his pocket. El Diablo, positioned at the front of the search line, approached the guard, who began conducting a thorough search, starting from the front and then instructing El Diablo to turn around for a search from behind. As El Diablo complied and turned his back, his gaze fell upon the prisoners lined up behind him, among whom stood Reggie. With contempt and a sardonic smile directed at Reggie, El Diablo watched as the search continued. Suddenly, Reggie, still clutching his wound, broke out of the line and sprinted towards El Diablo. With a swift motion, he raised the hand holding the knife and delivered a forceful stab to El Diablo's throat. The scene unfolded in surreal silence as everyone present remained frozen in disbelief. El Diablo's eyes widened in shock, swiftly replaced by agony as he attempted to stem the bleeding with his hands. However, he struggled to breathe, and within moments, his massive frame convulsed in pain before collapsing to the ground. As El Diablo writhed in agony, Reggie swiftly lay down on the ground, hands raised above his head in a gesture of surrender, declaring, "I know what I did," in a loud and frantic manner, seeking to signal his compliance to the guards. In response, the guards swiftly apprehended Reggie, placing him in solitary confinement without delay. The entire prison was on high alert, that night following El Diablo's death, as it was feared that his demise could trigger widespread chaos. Consequently, all inmates were confined to their cells and strictly prohibited from leaving for any reason. Reggie now faced his second murder charge, a grave offense that carried a high risk of execution upon conviction. With little chance of avoiding being found guilty, Reggie contemplated his grim future. Although his actions could arguably be justified as self-defense, even a successful plea would likely result in a lengthy sentence, possibly 10 years or more in solitary confinement. Feeling pessimistic about his prospects, Reggie viewed the appointment of a state-appointed lawyer with indifference, choosing one at random from the provided list. He believed that the outcome would remain unchanged regardless of the attorney's identity. However, this belief proved to be mistaken. His randomly selected lawyer, Christopher Blort, would go on to uncover a revelation that would alter the course of events. It all began when Christopher delved into the case files related to Reggie's original conviction for the 1994 murder outside a brothel. John Jones emerged as the key witness in the case, recounting that he observed the events of that fateful night from the second floor of the brothel. According to his testimony, the victim, Felipe Gonzalez, arrived at the brothel, parked his car, exited, and knocked on the door, inquiring about a specific individual. However, he was informed that the person he sought was absent. Subsequently, Felipe returned to his vehicle, where he encountered 3 armed teenagers, visibly identifiable as gang members, who demanded money from him. Due to Felipe's limited English proficiency, he failed to comprehend their demands. In a tragic turn of events, the teenagers fatally shot him before fleeing down an alleyway. Jones noted that one of the assailants appeared to be limping, suggesting he may have been injured during the altercation, either by his accomplices or accidentally by himself. The investigating police officer, inexperienced with such cases, began combing through records of arrests in the area, leading to Reggie's identification as a potential suspect. At 19 years old, Reggie was already associated with a gang involved in drug distribution, and his leg injury aligned with descriptions provided by Jones. Reggie was consequently arrested, charged, and imprisoned for the murder. However, as the lawyer scrutinized the case files, numerous discrepancies emerged. This means that it is impossible for the person who shot him to have been standing at the same level as the street where he was shot. The shot came from one of the neighboring houses from an upper floor. It's possible that the shots were fired from the brothel manager, John's window, suggesting he could be the actual perpetrator. Furthermore, there was a lack of fingerprints, DNA evidence, or eyewitness testimonies implicating Reggie in the crime. Even John, who initially testified against Reggie, later recanted his statement, revealing that he had provided false information to the police in exchange for leniency in running the illegal brothel. However, the most significant discovery made by the lawyer was regarding Reggie's leg wound, cited as evidence against him. It was determined that Reggie's leg injury, for which he was accused, was actually an old gunshot wound sustained when he was just 13 years old, 5 years prior to the alleged crime. Despite this, the investigating officer, eager to secure a quick conviction, overlooked this crucial detail in her haste to close the case and boost her record. Despite Reggie's persistent claims of innocence, he was unjustly convicted. Even during his imprisonment, Reggie diligently researched legal avenues to challenge his false charges, hoping for eventual exoneration. However, his efforts to distance himself from violence and conflict within the prison proved futile, as he was continually forced to defend himself in a hostile environment. Throughout the 3 years of legal proceedings, Reggie remained in solitary confinement following his altercation with El Diablo, until his case was eventually revisited by his lawyer for a retrial. In the end, the judge acquitted Reggie of the initial crime he was accused of. Regarding the murder of El Diablo, the charges were downgraded from first-degree murder to second-degree murder, resulting in a sentence of 10 years in solitary confinement for Reggie. This legal process was lengthy, and by the time the verdict was reached, Reggie had already spent 8 years in solitary confinement, which were counted toward his sentence. Consequently, he only had 2 years left to serve upon the ruling. After completing his remaining 2 years, Reggie was released from prison in 2009. Despite enduring 16 years of imprisonment, including a decade in solitary confinement, he found solace in his newfound freedom. Following his release, Reggie embarked on a lengthy legal battle to reclaim his rights. Ultimately, in 2017, Los Angeles awarded him a compensation of $5.2 million. While this sum cannot fully compensate for his suffering during incarceration, it provides financial security for the remainder of his life. With this, our story concludes. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.